Welcome to episode 51 of Successful Demo. Each episode analyze the theory and practical aspects of one module release cards. Now that Rain and Reverie is out, we are going to begin exploring the entire big box. Now, Rain and Reverie is a very special big box because unlike the previous ones, it explores every single faction, which means that in the same number of cards as a usual big box, which means that each faction is actually getting quite few cards. We are talking about 8 cards for the co-op side for each faction and 7 cards for each runner faction. Yet with this restriction, the good news is the game designers have managed to convey a very unique and characteristic idea for each faction with the 8 or 7 cards that they have printed. In NBN's example, which is the faction we'll be talking about today, for example, they've managed to shape up this taggy archetype where the runner is punished by eyes that give tags and or punish the runner for having tags. So that's really cool. The bad news is in NBN, this is basically trotting down the beaten path. We've seen countless of these tag-based eyes, tag-based archetypes, and really there's a lot of the cards that have came out on the NBN side are nothing new at all. It's the same old things redone, perhaps with a slightly more higher power level, but not really enough to justify playing. Except for the identity, Acme Consulting. This is the card we'll be covering today, along with Arella Salvatore, an in-faction card that surprisingly has nothing to do with tags, but it fits pretty well in the deck that I'm trying to make, so in it goes anyway. Let's first talk about the latter. Arella Salvatore has 3 main users in my mind, in decreasing order of power level. The first and probably best use case in my opinion is in combo decks that attempt to score 7 points in one turn, which makes it a pretty negative play experience card in my opinion, unfortunately. It is a very natural thing to do with Arella because her effect allows you to basically cheat another agenda on the board, and you can keep chaining agendas this way because you can install the new agenda on the same Arella Salvatore. The best part about this use case is that because you're doing all of this wombo combo in one turn, the runner has absolutely no window to snipe the newly installed agenda. They don't have the click to run it because you're executing the entire combo in one turn. The biggest problem with this combo idea is that you need to have all the agendas in your hand to work because Arella Salvatore installs the agenda from HQ. So this basically relegates this to a CI deck. I think it's possible. I'm not sure if it's gonna be a tier 1 deck. I'm not sure if there are enough, supporting cards to make Arella Salvatore CI a tier 1 deck, but it's not a very fun deck to play or play against, so I'm not gonna look at that use case. The second use case, which is more up my alley, is the agenda scoring tempo card. So Arella Salvatore rewards you for scoring agendas by giving you forward tempo. In this case, a new item in your remote that could potentially be yet another agenda that triggers Arella Salvatore again. You get the idea. It's basically like team sponsorship, but better because it gives you an advancement counter on the new item you install, saving you not just one click, which is what team sponsorship does. Arella Salvatore saves you 2 clicks because it gives you the free advancement. And since it's free, it saves you the credit needed to advance the card as well. That's a lot of value. So you are saving 2 clicks and a credit on your first res of Arella Salvatore, which is pretty okay. Subsequent triggers will only make Arella Salvatore that much better. In such a scenario, you want to play Arella Salvatore in a rush deck because rush decks obviously can make best use of this extra clicks save and credit save compared to a late game deck where the clicks and credit save don't really mean that much in the long run. It is also worth noting that Arella Salvatore can install cards other than agendas, right? So this is where non-agenda cards come into play. You can install assets, and especially assets that scale with advancement counters are particularly nice. I'm thinking of NGO Front as the prime target. Influence free and, gives you it basically always rewards you with extra 5 credit. The advancement counter placed by Arella Salvatore is basically 5 free credits, which is always nice to have. Then the third use case, this is where we delve into Jank Land. This is using Arella Salvatore as a Builder of Nations tempo card. Because it synergizes very well with the fact that Arella Salvatore can places exactly one advancement counter on the card, and that card need not be an item in the remote. It doesn't have to be an agenda, an upgrade, or an asset. It could be ice, right? So you can install ice with Arella Salvatore. It can be an advanceable ice, and what you have with Arella Salvatore in Builder of Nations is that you have an ice readily advanced to be with its teeth active, in the sense that Builder of Nations can immediately start firing off it, which is really, really cool. It's a really nice combo, if not for the fact that Arella Salvatore is a prohibitive 3 influence. Builder of Nations is already tight on influence due to its 12 influence limit as it is, so I would consider this a jank combo simply because you're playing an efficiency card that is so expensive to splash. Right, so because of this, we won't be playing the tier 1 NPE use case, we won't be playing the jank use case. We are going to focus on Arella as an agenda scoring tempo card. Let's look at some other final details of Arella. She has a high trash cost, just like Sensitivity Grid, which is always nice. Also, like Sensitivity Grid, you don't have to pre-res Arella. You only need to res Arella when you are going to use her, which is when you score your first agenda. So, until you score your agenda, it's a 0 to play, 5 to trash card, which is a really nice ratio. The problem with Arella, however, is that she is useless if drawn late. If Arella comes after you scored 1 or 2 agendas, then the amount of value she'll provide you is very marginal. Because of this, I believe you want to play either 0 or 3 copies of Arella Salvatore if you're using her as an agenda scoring tempo card. Finally, one nice benefit of Arella Salvatore is that it forces runners to check your remote server more often and earlier on than they would like. In typical rush decks, there's typically, after you score an agenda, right after you score an agenda, there will be nothing in the remote, right? Because after you score the agenda, typically your turn would go advance, score agenda. This empties the remote, so the runner knows they don't have to run the remote next turn because there's no agendas in there. You just scored 1 agenda from it, you haven't installed anything new. Arella Salvatore remedies this by putting something new in the remote. Now, if they didn't check last turn and you score an agenda off Arella, they have to check this turn because it could be yet another agenda that propels you into scoring match point. So yeah, Arella Salvatore basically compels the runner to run more, and that's often a good thing when we are playing with the corp identity Acme Consulting. Acme Consulting is an identity that basically buffs NBN Ice in the same way that Nisei Division buffs Jinteki Sai Ice. Acme Consulting buffs NBN Ice that have runner tag conditionals. The 2 most powerful Ice that I can think of that have tag conditionals are Data Ward and Universal Connectivity Fee. Data Ward is a pretty mediocre Ice because most runners can just waltz through it for 3 credits every time, assuming they're not tagged. But if they are forced into being tagged due to an ID ability like Acme Consulting, suddenly Data Ward is a gigantic monolith that very few runners have any good solution to. 4 subroutines, 8 base strength. That is ridiculous with a capital R. So yeah, this was the very first card I thought of comboing with Acme Consulting when Acme was first spoiled, and I still think it's a very powerful combo. No reason not to run 3 copies of it in your Acme deck. The other card that most people actually saw first as the combo with Acme Consulting is Universal Connectivity Fee, which is, a really, really good combo as well. Normally, this is not a very problematic Ice to face because you're untagged most of the time, but if you're forced into UCF, or Universal Connectivity Fee, and you're tagged, that is a huge game changer. It's a huge tempo swing because losing all your credits as the runner opens you to a whole host of punishments from the corp. So it is further complicated by the fact that while it's not as taxing to break as Data Ward, unfortunately some runners just don't have the solution for UCF. It's a trap Ice, so it cannot be broken by conventional fractals, decoders, or killers. You need an AI breaker or some other way to break subroutines of trap Ice. And that's a really, really nasty aspect of Acme Consulting that runners have to deal with now. So these two are very powerful cards, but there's another thing that makes UCF even better in Acme Consulting. Imagine a 2i server. It doesn't have to be a remote server, it just has to be any server with UCF on the outside. So the runner runs into UCF, whoops, they don't have the correct breaker due to Acme Consulting's ability. They are tagged because UCF is the outermost piece of ice, so it fires, the runner's bankrupt. But let's say they jack out, make some more money and then try to rerun your server. Boop! It's a data ward! Now guess what? Because UCF was trash, now data ward's the new outermost piece of ice on the server. And yeah, good luck breaking this 8 strength 4 subroutine monster. My point here is, because of UCF's trash ability combined with Acme's outermost trigger, it means that UCF does not turn off your innermost ice. If anything, after UCF fires, your innermost ice is turned back on, so you will still have a powerful remote at all times. UCF into data ward is probably the most disgusting thing you can create in Acme Consulting. The runner has very few ways to deal with a UCF, and even after the UCF fires, even fewer ways to deal with the data ward behind it. So yeah, some very, very nasty combos there. And UCF being able to make way for all these bigger ice at the base of the server. So that's really awesome and all, but Acme Consulting has a huge Achilles heel. It dies to Employee Strike like no other identity. If you thought Blue Sun and Mwekundu died to Employee Strike, well, you haven't seen Acme Consulting yet. Here's the big problem with Acme Consulting. Unlike, say, Mwekundu, if your ID ability is blank, well, you can at least still install your ice the cold hard way, good old way, by using a click and whatever credits to install your ice. It's still doable. It's just that it's less efficient than you would like it to be. But for Acme, if your ID ability is turned off, basically half the ice in your deck are dead. Your data wards are useless and your UCFs are useless because you have no way to tag the runner now. And you're running 3 copies of each. So that's half your ice in your deck that just do nothing. You can't have that as a possibility when Employee Strike is this ubiquitous in the current meta. Now some of you might be asking, then you can play cards like Data Raven, a reliable way of tagging the runner. Well, it's not that good, is it, right? Like if you're playing Data Raven just to diversify your ways of tagging the runner, then I think there are better corps to play this archetype in, and it's not a very good archetype to begin with if you need to use Data Raven, because now you need to find the correct pieces, you need to install them in the correct order, and after all that's done, it only protects a single server, whereas Acme Consulting is a constant ability that works across every single server. Very, very different effects here, and this is why Acme Consulting is so much better as an enabler for cards like Data Ward and UCF than Data Raven is. Right. So what's the solution to this? We need to find a way to deal with Strike if we are going to play a decent Acme deck. So obviously the answer is counter currents. I can't really think of many better solutions. You can play News Now Hour, you can, I don't know. News Now Hour is really the only other thing I can think of, but that's bad for different reasons. So really the only thing I can think of is just play 5 currents in your 49 card deck. We're gonna play Scarcities and 2 copies of Death and Taxes because that's the next best current I can find, and because we're playing so many currents and we'll probably have a current active at all times, why not take advantage of that? Just like Mwekundu, use Newshound as a consolation prize if you get Employee Struck. At least you have a solid end run that's cheap to rest somewhere in your deck. So that's basically the idea of this deck. It's a Glacier deck that punishes the runner if they don't have the correct tools for Data Ward / UCF, and it maintains, it strives to win the current war so that Acme Consulting will be always active, Newshounds will be always active, and we just keep jamming agendas in the remote, trying to score them as quickly as possible, bluff the opponent with an NGO front every now and then, and win the game on 7 agenda points. Very solid, very standard Netrunner. Let's play some Netrunner. Lila Patel is always a tricky runner to run up against Usually, my opening hand right here is a snap keep because there's Rashida in it, it's hedge fund in it. Sure, it has two agendas, but you know, we can afford to lose an agenda or two here and there. Not against Lila. Lila will just completely screw with our plans. So, we are forced to mull there. The good news is, no agendas in our hand. The bad news is, only one ice. So, I mean, we can do the obvious starting turn, ice up HQ with Data Ward, take hedge fund money, and then, draw a card. But the problem is, it leaves me open to a click 1, run R&D, steal an agenda, bounce HQ ice, click 2 and 3, diversion of funds. That is a really ugly way to start the game. Fortunately for us, it seems like our opponent is more focused on setting up their Earthrise than actually siphoning us. So, we take those. We enter turn 2 with a new piece of ice, so R&D and HQ are now safe. Thank goodness. Right, so they set up and review the fact that they are on run-based Lila. Paragon is the console of choice. I know there's lots of new cards, you'll be overwhelmed, but for those of you who are around, that's basically the new Desperado. Kind of, sort of, not really, but they have a pad tap installed. Now, that's a card, that's a card that gives them money over time, and we can't have that. So we are gonna trash the pad tap. That's for sure. We are definitely rich enough to do that. And yeah, apparently we do actually have enough money to trash the pad tap and get the Rashida going with protection from Data Ward. So we are pretty happy about that. They run falsified credentials on our Rashida. That's fine. My opponent here asked me for actions, and well, I didn't react. I mean, they know it's a Rashida, so be it. It's not like they're gonna drive by it. I don't think they will run drive-by and falsified credentials in the same deck, and they don't. Instead, they double falsified me. Bloody hell, god damn it. Yeah, there was no reason not to rest the Rashida there. That was a misplay by me. As soon as the Rashida was exposed, I should have just rested it. It's 0 to rest anyway. So, big mistake by me. That gives my opponent 4 free credits of falsified credentials, and they now have a bankroll rolling. That's the card that gives them 1 credit every run they make on the card. That's the other Desperado that criminals got. Well, so be it. We are still going to get our Rashida off. That's the good news. So lots of draw, lots of money. We are going to see some agendas that we can score here. Just kidding. No agendas. Alright, now what do we do? Since they have Paragon and Bankroll, I guess it's a good time to ice up Archives here and hopefully bait them into a remote run. If I can induce them to use an inside job here, that would be great. Now, Acme Consulting has several weaknesses, besides Employee Strike as mentioned, which is now played, but one of the bigger weaknesses is Inside Job, because every use of Inside Job basically negates your ID ability. What use is it if they are bypassing the outer ice, because Acme Consulting only fires when the runner's encountering outer ice, which Inside Job just completely bypasses. So yeah, I was trying to induce the inside job there, but my opponent didn't play it. Instead, they played Employee Strike for some reason, even though they didn't run, so I simply overrode their Employee Strike with Scarcity of Resources. Right, they played the Employee Strike to get rid of my first Scarcity, but they didn't realize that I had a second Scarcity, and even if they have a second strike, I have a Death and Taxes to follow that up. This is the benefit of running with 5 currents. You can actually afford to aggressively play your first Scarcity if you draw into the rest of them fairly quickly. Right, now it's time to play the bluff game. I'm going to install Advance, a card that is not an agenda because I have no agendas in hand. Yeah, I would jam an agenda here if I could, but I can't because I am not drawing into them. This would be a perfect time to draw an agenda because we basically established they're not running inside job. Right, so my opponent runs HQ click 1 here, and I choose to res because I don't want them to install Maxwell James and de-res my remote ice. It turns out they do have inside job, that cheeky kids, saving the inside job for when it actually matters, except that this was a fraud, this was a bluff, this isn't an agenda. Thank goodness I didn't draw an agenda because they would have stolen it right off me here. This was an NGO front, and now I'm just thinking of, of course you don't res the ice here, inside job bypasses it. So we are going to action before access, res the NGO front, get 5 credits off it, and our opponent just wasted that inside job. That's a win for us. They do get access to the Arella Salvatore, but I really don't care. If they spend 5 credits to trash it, we are winning because I have another Arella ready to go, and I didn't lose any money on this first Arella. So my opponent rightfully doesn't trash it, because it's just net tempo loss for them. 5 credits to trash is a huge ask, and Even though it has huge potential to enable my rush strategies, they simply cannot afford 5 credits at this point in time. Now I finally draw into my first agenda here, and I happily jam it in the remote, attempting to score it. There is absolutely no chance my opponent is going to steal it because it's unadvanced, so they won't be firing inside jobs at it. Scarcity is up, so they still have to respect the potency of my outer ice. So yeah, that's going to be a free build for me, but my opponent dropped some cards on the table that made me question my life decisions. Those are some very big cards there: Rook Trading and Citadel Sanctuary. Now this is a problem because my original intention was to score the project build of the Arella Salvatore and, you know, get a bluff going by installing a code replicator as the Arella Salvatore target. I did not do this because that would have cost me 5 credits, 3 to advance the build, 2 to res the Arella Salvatore. That would have left me at 5 credits, which would give them a free pass to use Rook Trading and clear the tag with Citadel Sanctuary. That's not good. I don't want to, you know, vault them into the lead, because when scoring the build, Lila will trigger and then they'll get a lot of money off Rook Trading. That is really bad for me. So I decided to hold on the scoring for a bit more, but as I started drawing to my next agenda in the global food, I really started to question my life choices here. I really should get rid of this build, feeling a bit desperate here, so that, you know, I can get the food into the server. Now, at the time of playing this, Rain and Reverie was not implemented yet on JNet, so we are doing everything manually. Because Lila's trigger and Arella Salvatore's trigger are identical and it's my turn, Arella Salvatore fires first, I put the food in the remote with the free advancement counter on it, and then Lila Patel fires, and this is where I realized Arella Salvatore might not be that good against Lila. She'll simply bounce back whatever I dropped in the remote. But nope, that's not the case. My opponent instead goes for R&D, opening up the R&D ice so that they can drop Armor Core and run R&D for huge value. They get Paragon credits, they get Bankroll credits, they get Armor Core counters. And best for them, the top card of R&D wasn't an agenda, so they could just run a couple times, get the bankroll money, and even scout the top card of R&D. Their stack. Pretty good there. Very good value, and this is why you never attempt to score agendas early versus leader. You know, you just suddenly swing a lot of tempo in their favor. They get the breaker set up, they get their money set up, and yeah, now you're forced to recoup your ice on R&D, which costs you time and energy. In the meantime, I'm just sticking to my guns here. Since I already pushed out the build, might as well attempt to go for the rush. The reason why I didn't, you know, ice up and play Glacier versus Lila was because I designed this as a rush deck, so, you know, better stick to my plans, I guess. We'll see whether it pays off. Anyway, since my opponent did not run my remote server, which is a global food by the way, since they didn't run it, they might think it's an NGO front, which makes perfect sense. The lower your credit pool is when you advance cards in the remote, the more likely it is to be an NGO front. And usually the runner will check it if you're poor, but you can't do that against Acme Consulting, because if it's a universal connectivity fee on the remote, you're boned. So yeah, you know, I'm happily just blatantly advancing what looks like an NGO front in the remote, even though I don't have the money to defend it at all. The remote is a data ward, which I don't have the money to res, but because of the threat of universal connectivity fee, because it looks like an NGO front, my opponent ignored it at their own peril, and I get to score a free 3-pointer as a result. Well, it's not free, it cost me a whole bunch of turns, but it was worth it. I'm now at match point 5-0, and I get an Arella trigger. Okay, that's perfect, because I just drew into the perfect card to Arella trigger at this point, the NGO front. I'm going to install Advance the NGO front for free, and that's 5 credits that goes towards building my board state back up. Wonderful stuff. Wonderful. Right, so my opponent doesn't really have any answer to this. Once again, they bounce the R&D ice, even though they really should be bouncing the card in server 1. They choose not to because reasons? Yeah, because they could potentially top deck an agenda of R&D, which they conveniently do, allowing them to bounce the NGO front back to my hand. Damn it, I should have rest the NGO front first. I was gambling that they wouldn't, you know, access an agenda of R&D. However, the worst thing happened here. They accessed not one but two agendas of R&D, and both were project bills. So all three project bills are out of play. That's really bad news for me, because now the only other agendas I have left that will win me the game are corporate sales teams and the remaining global foods. Suddenly things don't look sweet. This is what happens when you score agendas as the corp against Lila. You get utterly punished for it. Yeah, I'm really starting to regret my life decisions here. My opponent masterfully dismantled my entire remote, bouncing the ice off it and then clearing out the code replicator that was in there, wasting all my time and effort building that server. It's now ground down to dust. Of course, they still leave the Arella Salvatore standing there with because it's beneficial for them. Not only will I probably not get any more triggers off of it, but it's also a free farming ground for their Ormaquer, their Paragon, their bankrolls. So my first priority here is to ice up that Arella Salvatore so that my opponent cannot make good use of it. Thankfully, I've drawn all three of my IP blocks early, which by the way are fantastic ice in Acme, because the end run subroutine is active if it's the outermost, and against this particular Ormaquer deck, it doubles as a bonus. It tags my opponent, meaning that they can't run multiple IP blocks in a turn, and they're forced to use their Citadel trigger on IP block, meaning that they're not taking money off rook trading. Of course, Citadel can only clear one tag a turn, so if they are taking tags from IP block, they are not using rook trading on that turn. They are not as rich as they could be. Now I'm going to blatantly install double advance and NGO front here because I badly need the credits. When you install double advance and go down to 0 credits, it's very obvious that the item in the remote is an NGO front, in which case you may as well res it. Not to mention that if my opponent plays something like an interdiction or a drive-by, I'll be set very far back, so we want to res the NGO front here. Right, and then they continue setting up with rook trading. So now my objective is to build up a nice solid remote that I can score my final agenda off. Probably the food in my hand right now, because there are not that many better targets out there. The problem is IP block is not sufficient as a defense for my remote, so the first thing I need to do is to lock my opponent out by purging virus counters. Get rid of the Ormaquer, which my opponent does because they realize that with 3 IP blocks on the table, it's best to just use regular breakers instead of Ormaquer. So they override the Ormaquer with paperclip before the IP block on and counter effect fires, so they don't take the tag. They break the IP block for 3 credits, which I'm more than happy to see. 3 credits to break IP block is pretty taxing. And on the last click, they're gonna run R&D here, break the IP block, and I'm gonna pop NGO front here in case I need the credits. I don't know why, but well, nothing happens, so the game goes on. Right, so now that I've gotten rid of my opponent's Ormaquer, it means that they don't have universal breakage. Right? They don't have an AI breaker basically. So this means that Code Gates are live, Sentries are live, News Hound, and what is it called? Watchtower? I forgot. Gatekeeper. Yeah, sorry. Gatekeeper. The purple ice that was in my hand, they are both live. Gatekeeper, of course, the new HB Code Gate that has +6 strength on the turn that you res it. And it has 2 subroutines. I'm basically using it as an Enigma substitute in this deck that has 6 strength every now and then, basically. So yeah, just think of it as an Enigma that it's usually an Enigma. It costs 3 to res and it has 2 subroutines, including an end run, but sometimes it's 6 strength, and that's pretty cool. So that's exactly what I put on my remote, the Gatekeeper, because my opponent has no decoder installed. Unfortunately, I get account siphon here, which is unfortunate if not for the fact that my opponent is paying through their teeth to land this account siphon, right? Even though I'm losing 5 very valuable credits here, which means I can't score this food as early as I would like, it actually costs them 10 credits to break the data ward, 3 for the on and counter effects, 7 to break all the subroutines with paperclip. Was that even worth it? I mean, it's a 10 credit swing, but they lost 10 credits. I don't know. And 2 clicks for that matter. I don't know. That was really weird, but we take those, right? We take those. So I'm too poor. This turn would probably have been an install double advance on the global food if not for the account siphon, so I guess my opponent did something right. We're forced to click for credits here. I need money to res the remote Gatekeeper and quintuple advance the global food, so that's going to take time. And because my opponent is starting to build up their money, I think I'm forced to ice my centrals here. I drew into the universal connectivity fee, my very first one, and figured it would be best on R&D. Now UCF is actually really threatening because my opponent dropped their armor core. Haha. So with armor core out of the way, UCFs are now live and they hurt like nobody's business. I put the UCF on HQ and that makes it very, very blatant that the HQ ice is a UCF, because I wouldn't put ice on HQ otherwise. Because this deactivates data ward, deactivates Acme consulting on data ward. So it obviously is a UCF and I'm basically preventing my opponent from ever running HQ. Which is awesome because agendas are surely going to start piling up in HQ and I don't want to lose to a legwork. So back to my turn, we draw an IPO. Nice if not for the fact that we are just 1 credit short of firing it this turn. So, you know, our scoring has to wait, but R&D is safe, HQ is safe, and the remote is... they don't have an answer for it yet. No airbag nail, no armor core with 6 counters, so I feel pretty good about scoring this global food here. There's a code replicator in the server. It's go time, or is it? I could choose between scoring the IPO now, or rather scoring 1 agenda now, or playing the IPO, which gives me enough money to score 2 agendas. I went with the IPO here because I want to score both agendas. The reason I'm saying I need to score both agendas is that I'm fairly sure my opponent will be able to successfully contest one of them, be it an inside job, or, you know, running a central and then bouncing my remote agenda or something. I'm sure my opponent has tricks and ways in which they can siege my remote, especially with their 19 credits. Even though it seems like their board is barely built up, they have 10 turning wheel counters, so that's something you always have to respect. Because of this, I decided that the safer play was actually to get the IPO money than to attempt scoring this turn. Since I'm going to get IPO money, might as well make good productive use of this turn, which is why I install over the remote IP block. Now that armor core is out of the way, I don't really need it. Instead, I want to have the outermost data ward ready for server 1. Since I got my new money from IPO, might as well put it to good use by installing a data ward on the remote, making it nigh impenetrable. Unfortunately, my opponent bamboozles me here by playing, what's that called? A fork in the road or something. That new Anarch card that allows you to run archives and, if successful, access cards from HQ and R&D. Turns out, it synergizes with Turning Wheel. So my opponent is going to use a bunch of Turning Wheel counters here to see 4 cards in my hand and 4 cards off the top of R&D. Great. Yeah, just great. We are manually running HQ here because it's not implemented on JNet yet, but basically because I have 2 agendas in my hand, my opponent steals them both and wins the game. Bloody hell, what a party pooper. I must say, that was a very satisfying game. I had a very good opening while my opponent fumbled to set up, so I managed to get out of the gates early and get to match point, but I was aptly punished by Lila Patel's ability and my opponent was able to surge through and make a comeback, winning the game 7 points to 5. So yeah, as we saw this game, Arella Salvatore didn't do that much because Lila Patel was in the way. Now, this counter, in a sense, is actually not as bad as you think. You might think, oh, Arella is blanked because Lila exists. Well, the way I look at it is, Lila is blank because I have Arella in my deck. The ability to freely install after an agenda score means that if my opponent chooses to use Lila's ability on the newly installed and advanced card, that is the Lila ability being absorbed instead of Lila being used to bounce, say, my R&D ice. And that's a win for me, because then I don't have to reinstall my R&D ice and I don't have to, you know, be exposed to my opponent pressuring and pummeling R&D. As a matter of fact, my opponent Antler played very smartly. Instead of defaulting to using Lila to bounce the advanced card, which is super tempting, you know, making the Corp lose a lot of tempo by denying them their advanced card, my opponent instead chose to bounce R&D ice majority of the time, because that opened up the R&D server, allowing them to run 4 times the next turn, get their bankroll money, get their Paragon triggers, and most importantly, steal more agendas. On the turn, my opponent stole the double bill. They basically dismantled my remote server after that because I failed to res the NGO which I had installed with Arella. They bounced the R&D ice, ran R&D, stole the bill, bounced the NGO that I just installed with Arella. So that's a double kick in, yeah, that was a double kick in my face. That was a misplay by me. I definitely should have pre-res my NGO front when my opponent was threatening to steal agendas off the top of R&D. And yeah, I basically lost this game, not because I got unlucky with the agenda steals, it happens with Lila, but because I was too tunneled into my deck's usual strategy of rushing out agendas turn after turn in an Arella server, and I was too tunneled into my rush strategy overall where I was trying to win by, say, turn 10 or 11. This is not how you play against Lila, and I know that very well. Lila Patel punishes rush decks by exposing central servers, and with the amount of central pressure in the card pool nowadays, that's never a good idea. If I had spent my time building up my servers instead, making sure everything is double ice and taking money so that they cannot freely rogue trading and then clear tags with Citadel Sanctuary, I probably would have been in a much better position. So yeah, definitely getting too tunneled into my deck's idea. I should adapt to my opponent's build, which is one that can heavily punish me for rushing out too quickly, which I did. Overall though, I think Arella's power level, at least in the context of this deck, is relatively marginal. This game, I found the early Arella. In fact, I found 3 copies of Arella early, so the duplicate copies were just dead. Arella is a unique card, so, you know, there's not much use for it past the first copy. The other thing is that I managed to score 2 agendas this game, a project build and a global food, so I got 2 Arella triggers, which means that Arella gave me a net gain of 3 clicks. Pretty good gain, I would say, after you compensate for the fact that she's 1 click to install and 2 credits to res. However, a 3-click gain is it's decent, but it's nothing to write home about. It's not a super powerful, super efficient card like the likes of Violet level clearance, for example. It's not bonkers, I would say. So yeah, the issue comes in the deck building phase where Arella Salvatore as a card slot competes with many other cards in the card pool, and that is something that I have to worry about because there just might be better cards out there in the card pool that should take up Arella's slot instead that tend to do more work. Next thing, Acme. Now, I want to talk about Acme, and I'm trying to hammer this point home because this particular game illustrates it perfectly well. Imagine this, picture this scenario. This was the board state after my opponent stole the W and I started icing up all my servers. What if my opponent had Employee Strike here? Think about it. Turning off my ID ability would render my data ward on my HQ useless all of a sudden. That would mean that they could run HQ for just 3 credits by paying the data ward toll, the on-encounter effect. And after that, they are free to go, which means that they can palm on my hand with legworks and worse still, diversions of funds. So Employee Strike is a super scary card that really turns off Acme. If you didn't believe what I said in the intro to this video, well, this game just shows it. If they had an Employee Strike at this particular point in time, I would have been completely screwed, probably eating a diversion of funds at not much cost to my opponent's tempo. Now, some of you might be saying, hey, it's not like you can do anything about it. If they have strike in their hand, they'll just play it on their turn. You can't counter current during the runner's turn, and that is true. However, because you're leaning into your big eyes, your data wards, your UCFs so much, having counter currents means that they will only have one turn's worth of a window to exploit to divert your funds to legwork you. At least your ice isn't turned off for the entire game. And trust me, if you don't have counter currents, they will be turned off for the entire game because you won't be able to override the current by scoring your own agendas. It's very difficult to score agendas in Acme if you're under strike because your best ice is not available. The runner can play that much more aggressively to contest your remote. So yeah, this completely justifies why I run 5 currents, and winning the current war this particular game was a huge help in getting me ahead. Right, the other issue I found with this particular Acme deck was that I didn't have enough money, and I think this is another deck building issue because, the root cause of not having enough money is simply because I'm playing Acme Consulting instead of Asmari EdTech, your go-to tier 1 economy ID in NBN. It's so good, 2 credits a turn. Losing that is a huge deal. We saw our opponent pay 10 credits for a diversion of funds somewhere in the mid to late game, but it was completely justifiable because I had to spend, I think, 2 2 turns worth of clicks just clicking for credits so that I could begin even considering scoring the global food in my hand. And I didn't even get to that stage because my opponent won off the archives run with turning wheels at the end. But back to the deck building stage. If you find yourself building an Acme deck with data wards, you should ask yourself first and foremost, would it be better if you swap out those data wards for endless Eulers instead and playing it in Asmari? Because losing those Asmari credits is a huge deal. I can't stress this enough. If you're clicking for credits most of the game, the runner is probably going to get ahead of you at some point in time, as my opponent did this game. You're really not that rich as MBN without Asmari credits or without assets if you're playing something like CTM. So money is a big issue for Acme, and that is a big thing you're giving up. Despite Acme being a very powerful ability, money is more important. Now, let's talk about combos and non-combos as usual for Acme Consulting. Marcus Batty seems like a natural fit in Acme Consulting because Acme usually plays Glacier style. You packing big ice like data wards, and obviously that costs a lot of money for the runner to break. What better way to amplify this than to use Marcus Batties to fire end the runs when they reach the end of the server, and then force them to break the data ward again if they want to rerun that server. That's usually what you would do in the Glacier deck, but you can't do that in Acme because when they reach the base or the bottom of your server, they're no longer tagged. They're only tagged when you approach the outer ice. So when you attempt to fire Marcus Batty on one of those end the run if the runner is tagged subroutines, wait, they're not tagged, so that subroutine does nothing. So Marcus Batty is a non-bo in the sense that it does not, or should I say, it is suboptimal. Your Batty users will typically be suboptimal if you build a fairly deep remote, like 2 or 3 ice deep. The only good time to fire Marcus Batty is after the break that your outermost ice, say a data ward on the outermost. Then you fire the Marcus Batty on the end run if the runner's tag subroutine before they lose the tag that they would have from Acme. The other way is to find a hard end run subroutine, which is pretty difficult in this deck. The only proper end runs I have are Enigma and Gatekeeper. So you're looking, most of your ice in Acme Consulting isn't hard end run, which is why Marcus Batty isn't that good. Its only real niche use case, which is pretty good, don't get me wrong, is to fire universal connectivity fee against runners with a way to break your trap ice. So if you're packing Marcus Batty for that reason, that's fine. Otherwise, if you expect to tax the runner by forcing them through your remote multiple times, I would prefer a card like Code Replicator, which is a lot more reliable. Right, more combos. Keegan Lane. You might be tempted to play all these upgrades that work only when the runner's tagged, but Keegan Lane is a non-bo with Acme because the removal of a tag is a cost to using Keegan Lane. You need to be able to remove the tag in order to fire the Trash 1 program, and you can't remove the additional tag from Acme because it's not a so-called real tag. So because of this, Keegan doesn't work with Acme. Now, there's another upgrade that actually works, and I think some people may have spotted it. It's Henry Phillips. And technically, yes, Henry Phillips does combo with Acme Consulting. However, this is actually a red herring, or a trap, I should say, because Henry Phillips is nothing more than a win more card. If your opponent is breaking your data ward subroutines the hard way, you're winning anyway. Why do you need the extra 6 credits from Henry Phillips, other than the fact that to boast about getting plus 6 credits from Henry Phillips as an achievement? Otherwise, the extra 6 credits is not going to make or break the game. You are probably already winning the game if they are forced to break data wards the hard way. What you should be concerned with in your deck, instead of packing these redundant win more cards, is to pack cards that enable you to lose less against those matchups that don't break your data wards in the normal fashion. And that leads us to the hard counters to Acme Consulting. We've seen 2 of them in this particular Lila game. Employee Strike and Inside Job, both of which holds your ID pretty hard, also holds Henry Phillips pretty hard. They just use Strike or Inside Job on your Henry Phillips server and trash the Henry Phillips. You are very sad. What else makes Henry Phillips and Acme sad? Well, Security Nexus. I may have mentioned this earlier, but yes, it bypasses the outermost ice, which is the most important ice in Acme Consulting. So as a bigger bonus for the runner, it also circumvents the on-encounter effect of Data Ward, so they don't take the 3 credit tax. This is a really bad card to face against if you're Acme Consulting, especially since you're typically not rich enough to beat the Nexus Trace. This is why I pack Code Replicator in my deck. It forces them, the runner, to, because Nexus you can only fire Nexus once per turn, and Code Replicator forces you into encountering the Outer Ice twice. So that is a good way to stop the runner from getting into your Data Ward server if you're up against Nexus. But otherwise, that's about it. Nexus is a pretty good counter against Acme. Another good counter that I'm very worried about, that's very ubiquitous right now, is Maxwell James, which, just like Nexus, is able to target the most important ice on your remote server in your outermost ice. Particularly if you're banking on Universal Connectivity fee to hit a runner that typically doesn't run AI breakers like standard Anarch. Anarch decks usually only run Conspiracy breakers, but Maxwell James allows them to get past trapped ice such as UCF. And this is a big problem for Acme Consulting because it leaves the outermost UCF intact on the remote. This means that UCF doesn't trash. So your inner ice doesn't get enabled by Acme Consulting, and what you're left with is a very flimsy remote server. Now, there are ways to counter this, of course, most prominently the Navi Mumbai City Grid, which I run one off in my deck. While they still can de-res a remote ice with Maxwell James, they can't do it during the run, which is the key window, because de-resing with Maxwell James during the run allows them to pass the UCF without the subroutine firing. If they fire Maxwell James outside of the run, they won't be able to bypass UCF because you still have the window to res UCF during the run. So yeah, this is why I pack Navi Grid in my deck. It covers a bunch of breaker options like David, like SMC, like Grappling Hook, but Maxwell James is the primary concern I have. So as you can see, a lot of problem cards that you have to worry about when you're running Acme Consulting. Any one of these hard counters can easily ruin your day, which is why I think Acme Consulting, as powerful ability as it is in the current card pool, is kept in check by these hard counters. It's very difficult to cover all your bases with just 49 cards in your deck. Maybe you can come up with a better more robust Acme deck than I can. If you can, please share it in the comment section. I would love to see what people come up with. Until then, as always, it's happy net running from me. Goodbye.